Most of us spend our lives waiting for a feeling to save up. We wake up hoping for a spark, a sudden rise of energy, a push strong enough to carry us through the day. And when it comes, even for a moment, we breathe easier. We tell ourselves this time will be different. This time we'll stay consistent. This time we'll finally become the person we keep imagining. But then the next morning arrives, quieter than expected, and the spark is gone. We feel heavy again, unsure again, drifting back into the same patterns we swore we would escape. And in that small moment, when the excitement fades and the silence returns, something uncomfortable appears. We realize how fragile motivation truly is. We rarely admit this out loud. It's easier to blame ourselves. We say we're lazy or broken or not cut out for the life we want. But those words aren't the truth. They're only symptoms of a deeper misunderstanding. We were raised to believe that motivation is the engine of change, that progress comes from passion, and that passion lasts forever. Yet if you watch your own life honestly, you'll see a different pattern. Motivation rises like a wave, powerful for a moment, then disappearing before we can grasp it. Some days it lifts us. Most days it leaves us behind. And the more we chase it, the more exhausted we feel. As time passes, we start to notice a painful cycle. We wait for motivation to start. We start, we stumble, we lose the feeling, we stop. Then we wait again, hoping the next burst will last longer than the last. But it never does. And beneath all the noise, a quiet truth begins to form. Motivation was never meant to stay. It was never designed to be the foundation of a strong life. It was only ever a visitor, a temporary spark, a moment of brightness that cannot carry the weight of a long journey. And once we see this, even for a second, something inside us shifts. In that shift, there's a kind of freedom. Because once we stop expecting motivation to sustain us, we stop blaming ourselves for its absence. We see that the problem was never a lack of passion, but a dependence on something unstable. We start to understand that real strength does not come from feeling ready. It comes from acting even when we aren't. It comes from quiet choices, small movements, simple steps repeated on days when the mind is loud and the heart is tired. And though these choices may seem insignificant, they create a force far stronger than motivation ever could. What we rarely notice is how these tiny decisions shape us. Each one is like a vote for the person we want to become. Every time we show up when we don't feel like it, something within us hardens, clarifies, and aligns. Slowly, without noise or applause, we begin to build a different kind of identity. Not the identity that waits for inspiration, but the identity that creates movement from stillness. The identity that chooses control over emotion, intention over impulse, direction over distraction. This is where real change begins, not in the excitement of starting, but in the discipline of continuing. And the more we lean into this truth, the more we realize that the power we are searching for is not the rush of a moment, but the stability of a mindset that does not rise and fall with motivation, but stays calm, steady, and grounded no matter the day. A mindset built not on feelings, but on choices. And with that understanding, a new question begins to surface, soft but persistent. If motivation isn't the answer, then what is? What force can guide us when emotion fades and desire disappears? What does it truly mean to take control from within? And who do we become when we do? Control is a word we often misunderstand. We imagine it as force, as pressure, as the ability to bend life into the shape we want. But as time passes, we learn that life rarely listens to our demands. It moves on its own terms, with its own rhythm, and no amount of frustration can change that. What we can change, however, lives much closer to home. It lives in the quiet space inside us, in the thoughts we allow, the impulses we follow, and the decisions we make when no one is watching. And this is where the real weight of control exists. Not in the world outside, but in the world within. Most days, the inner world feels anything but controlled. It feels loud, restless, and unpredictable. One moment we want comfort, the next we want progress, and then suddenly we want escape. We wake up tired and our mind tells us to stay in bed. We face a small challenge and it whispers that we should avoid it. We feel a hint of fear and it convinces us to retreat. And later, when the noise settles, we look back and wonder why we acted against our own intentions. What we rarely admit is that the mind can pull us in every direction, unless we learn to guide it gently. But guidance is not the same as dominance. The Stoics understood this deeply. They knew that trying to control everything leads only to exhaustion. The world cannot be pushed into perfection, and other people cannot be shaped to fit our expectations. In truth, the only place where influence truly matters is within our own thoughts and choices. And when we stop trying to command the world and start learning to command ourselves, something inside begins to shift. The noise grows softer, the reactions lose their grip, the chaos becomes more manageable. This kind of control is quiet. It doesn't demand attention or recognition. It shows up in small, private moments, often too subtle for others to see. It appears when we choose to get up even though the body feels heavy, when we pause before reacting to a fear that isn't real, when we face a discomfort instead of running from it. These choices look simple, almost insignificant, but they reveal a different kind of strength, a strength that isn't born from motivation, but from awareness, from a calm acceptance of what belongs to us and what doesn't. And once we understand this difference, a strange peace begins to grow. We stop wrestling with things that were never ours to control. We stop blaming ourselves for storms we didn't create. We stop spending energy on the parts of life that refuse to obey us. Instead, we turn inward. We sit with our thoughts. We watch our impulses rise and fall. We choose what to feed and what to let pass. This is the beginning of inner mastery, the moment when responsibility stops feeling heavy and starts feeling grounding. The more we practice this separation, the clearer everything becomes. We start to see which parts of our life change when we act, and which parts change only with time. We start to trust our ability to respond instead of react, and slowly, what once felt overwhelming becomes something we can handle with steady hands. Control transforms from a struggle into a quiet partnership with ourselves. And in that partnership, we discover that reshaping a life does not come from dramatic decisions or sudden inspiration. It comes from the small, steady actions we choose again and again, the actions that begin to form the person we're becoming next. We often imagine strength as something dramatic, something loud, something that arrives in one defining moment and changes everything at once. But then, as time passes, we start to see that real power moves differently. It doesn't burst in with fire. It grows in silence, in the smallest corners of our day, in the choices that seem too ordinary to matter. We wake up earlier than we want to, and even though no one sees it, something inside us shifts. We show up to the thing we promised ourselves we would do, and even if it feels slow, a quiet part of us straightens. We keep a promise that only we will ever know about, and in that single decision, our identity tightens just a little more. These moments look small from the outside, almost invisible, but they are the first stones on the path toward the person we want to become. What we rarely admit is that we spend years searching for breakthroughs, waiting for a surge of motivation, powerful enough to erase all our doubts. We imagine there will be a day when everything clicks and discipline becomes effortless. But life rarely gives us moments like that. Instead, it gives us mornings when we feel tired, afternoons when our mind wants escape, evenings when comfort seems easier than growth. And in these moments, the real work begins. Not in the rush, but in the repetition. Not in the dramatic choice, but in the consistent one. Each small act becomes a message to ourselves, a simple whisper that says, I am trying, I am learning, I am building something that matters. In truth, discipline is not punishment. It is not a rigid life with no room for joy. Discipline is a form of respect, a gentle way of saying my life deserves structure, my future deserves effort, my mind deserves clarity. When we choose a small act of discipline, we aren't restricting ourselves. We're shaping ourselves. We're placing one more stone on a road that didn't exist before, a road that leads to a stronger sense of who we are. And as the stones collect, something subtle happens. The path becomes easier to follow. The identity becomes easier to trust. We stop questioning whether we can be consistent, because our actions begin answering that question for us. And as this rhythm takes root, the emotional weight begins to change. The things that once felt impossible become routine. The temptations that once pulled us away lose their power. We grow a little steadier, a little clearer, a little more grounded in our own direction. It doesn't happen in a day. It happens in the unnoticed minutes, the quiet decisions, the moments when we could have gone backward, but chose not to. These choices may seem small, but together they create a kind of inner gravity, pulling us toward a version of ourselves we once thought was out of reach. What we often overlook is how deeply these small acts shape our identity. Every time we choose action over excuse, the image we hold of ourselves becomes more real. Every time we follow through, even when our feelings resist, we teach ourselves that we can be trusted. And trust is the foundation of inner power. It is the silent confidence that grows when our actions and our intentions begin to align. That is where discipline transforms from effort into identity, from struggle into strength. And once we understand this, a new question quietly rises in the background, one that guides the next part of the journey. What happens when we learn to stand strong even when our feelings pull us in another direction? And who do we become when our actions finally lead the way? 12. There comes a moment in every life when we realize how much of our behavior is shaped by passing feelings. We wake up hopeful one day and we give our best. We wake up heavy the next and everything feels impossible. Our moods shift like weather, rising and falling without warning, and yet we build our choices around them as if they were solid ground. But then, with enough time and enough honesty, we start to see the truth. Feelings are powerful, but they are not reliable. They can lift us to clarity, and they can pull us into confusion. They can open a door, and they can close the same door seconds later. And if our entire life is controlled by these movements, we end up living in circles. What we rarely admit is that emotions are not enemies. They are signals. They are reminders of what hurts, what matters, what needs attention. But they are not commands. They are not laws we must obey. The Stoics understood this with a quiet wisdom. They knew that freedom does not come from eliminating emotion, but from learning to stand steady while emotion moves through us. They believed that strength begins the moment we can feel something deeply and still choose our actions from a deeper place. Not from panic, not from fear, but from values we have shaped with intention. As time passes, we start to notice how different life feels when we stop letting our feelings decide our direction. We may still feel tired, but we can rise anyway. We may still feel doubtful, but we can move anyway. We may still feel fear, but we no longer let it decide who we are. This is not numbness. It is clarity. It is the quiet understanding that feelings are temporary guests in the mind, while our actions become the architecture of our identity. When we choose based on what we believe rather than what we feel in the moment, we begin to build a life we can trust. And this trust is powerful. It grows slowly, like a steady flame. Each time we act from intention rather than impulse, the flame becomes stronger. Each time we follow through when we don't feel ready, we learn something about ourselves that emotion alone could never teach us. We begin to see that inner power is not some dramatic force. It is the calm ability to hold our feelings without collapsing into them, to let the storm pass without letting the storm define us. In truth, this is where real freedom lives, not in changing the mood, but in changing the way we respond to the mood. Not in trying to control how we feel, but in controlling what we do with what we feel. When we understand this, the world begins to soften. Life feels less like a battle and more like a partnership between emotion and intention. The noise in the mind becomes something we can observe instead of obey. And slowly, almost quietly, we become stronger than the feelings that once dictated our every move. As the strength grows, a new kind of peace begins to open within us. A peace that does not depend on good days or good moods. A peace built from consistent choices, steady habits, and a clearer sense of who we want to become. And with this peace comes the final shift on the path of inner control, the moment when we realize that a steady life is not born from perfect emotions, but from the disciplined heart that knows how to lead even in the middle of the storm. There comes a point when the search for motivation finally slows down and something quieter begins to take its place. We stop waiting for the perfect morning, the perfect mood, the perfect burst of energy, and we start relying on something steadier. We begin to act not because we feel inspired, but because we've learned to lead ourselves. And as time passes, this shift creates a different kind of life, a calmer life, a life that doesn't swing so wildly between extremes. We no longer wake up wondering who we will be today. We know, because control, once it settles inside us, becomes its own kind of anchor. What we rarely admit is that most of our suffering came from fighting everything we felt. We tried to suppress fear. We tried to chase excitement. We tried to force motivation to stay. But then we discovered that the mind doesn't work on command. Feelings rise and fall like seasons, and the more we depend on them, the more unstable life becomes. When we finally stop wrestling with every emotion and start guiding ourselves through them, life softens. The noise inside us becomes less threatening. The mood swing loses its power, and suddenly actions that once felt impossible become natural because they no longer depend on how we feel in the moment. In truth, living with inner control doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't feel like a movie scene or some great heroic transformation. It feels simple, steady, grounded. It feels like walking on solid ground after years of drifting. You begin to trust yourself again, not because every day is easy, but because you've learned how to act even on the hard days. The heaviness that once controlled you doesn't disappear, but it no longer determines your direction. The temptation to quit still appears, but it no longer pulls you off your path. This is what quiet victory looks like. Not a loud celebration, but a life that slowly aligns with who you want to be. And as this new steadiness grows, something deeper awakens. You start to see the difference between the life you had and the life you're building now. Before, you waited for sparks to carry you forward. Now, you build your own momentum. Before, you reacted to everything around you. Now, you respond from a calmer place within. Before, you hoped for strength. Now, you practice it. And with each day, the person you're becoming feels less like a dream, but more like a quiet truth settling into your bones. What we rarely notice is how powerful consistency becomes. Once emotion stops controlling the wheel, a single day of clarity leads to another. A single choice becomes a habit. A habit becomes part of your character, and the character you build begins to reshape everything around you. You stop needing perfect conditions. You stop waiting for the right feeling. You stop looking outside yourself for the fire to begin, because the fire is already there, small, steady, reliable. As time passes, this inner flame becomes something you protect, not with force, but with intention. You treat your actions like steps on a path you chose with care. You treat your choices like seeds of the life you want to grow. And little by little, you begin to understand the truth the Stoics carried for centuries. The truth hidden beneath every struggle and every discipline. Your life is not shaped by sudden sparks. It is shaped by the quiet flame you tend to each day, by the decisions that stay steady when your emotions do not, by the inner control you practice until it becomes the most natural part of who you are. And when you finally feel this peace, this calm, grounded strength, you realize that this is the power you were searching for all along. Not motivation that fades, but control that stays. Not chaos that consumes you, but clarity that guides you. A quiet victory, built one steady moment at a time, becoming the foundation of the life you were meant to live.